This is Dollar Logic, where we break down the hidden logic behind money, business, and the systems that shape your everyday life. No jargon, no fluff, just clear answers. A cup of coffee, a bag of groceries, a used car, prices for almost everything seem to keep climbing every year. It's not your imagination, and it's not any one store deciding to charge more just because they can. It's an economy-wide phenomenon called inflation, and today we're breaking down what it actually is, what's driving it right now, and why a small amount of it is considered completely normal. Inflation is simply the rate at which prices for goods and services rise over time, which means each dollar buys a little less than it used to. Economists measure this using the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, a running tally of prices across a broad basket of goods and services that people commonly buy, from food and rent to gasoline and healthcare. As of mid-2026, annual inflation in the U.S. has been running around 3.5%, meaning prices overall are about 3.5% higher than they were the same time the previous year. Economists also track core inflation, which strips out food and energy prices since those tend to swing wildly month to month. To get a clearer read on the underlying trend, core inflation has recently been running closer to 2.6%. One major driver is what's called demand pull inflation. This happens when people collectively have more money to spend or simply want to buy more than what's currently available, and businesses respond by raising prices instead of running out of stock entirely. More demand chasing a limited supply of goods naturally pushes prices upward. It's basic supply and demand playing out across an entire economy. The opposite driver is cost push inflation, which happens when the cost of actually producing goods rises, higher energy prices, disrupted supply chains, rising wages, or increased material costs. When it costs a business more to make and deliver a product, that added cost frequently gets passed along to the customer in the form of higher prices. This is a big part of what happened in 2021 and 2022, when supply chain disruptions combined with a surge in demand pushed U.S. inflation to its highest level in 4 decades. There's also a monetary side to inflation. When there's simply more money circulating throughout an economy without a matching increase in the actual goods and services available, each unit of that money tends to be worth a little less, which shows up as rising prices across nearly every category. This is part of why central banks watch the money supply so closely, and why large-scale programs like quantitative easing, where a central bank injects money into the economy, are always weighed carefully against the risk of stoking inflation. History offers some useful lessons here. In the 1970s, the U.S. experienced a period known as stagflation, high inflation combined with slow economic growth and high unemployment, a combination economists previously thought was almost impossible. It took a deliberate, painful campaign of sharply raising interest rates in the early 1980s to finally bring inflation back under control, at the cost of a significant recession. That episode is a big reason modern central banks act more aggressively and more quickly than they used to when inflation starts climbing. Once inflation starts running high, it can also become self-reinforcing through something called a wage price spiral. Workers demand higher wages to keep up with rising costs, businesses raise prices to cover those higher wages, and the cycle repeats. This is one reason central banks try to act early. The longer high inflation persists, the harder it becomes to bring back down without real economic pain. It's worth knowing that a small amount of inflation is actually considered normal and even healthy for an economy. Most central banks, including the U.S. Federal Reserve, target around 2% annual inflation, believing that a mild, steady rate encourages people to spend and invest their money rather than hoard cash while waiting for prices to stay flat forever. The real concern isn't inflation existing at all. It's inflation running too high, moving unpredictably, or spiraling in a way that outpaces how fast people's wages are growing. Inflation doesn't affect everyone equally either. People holding cash savings or money in low-interest accounts watch their purchasing power quietly erode every year inflation runs above their interest rate. On the other hand, people who owe fixed-rate debt, like someone with an old, low-rate mortgage, can actually benefit slightly, since they're repaying that debt using dollars that are worth less than when they originally borrowed the money. People on fixed incomes, like retirees living on a set pension, are often hit the hardest, since their income doesn't automatically adjust upward as prices rise. You may have also noticed something called shrinkflation, when a bag of chips or a box of cereal quietly gets smaller while the price stays exactly the same. There's also a subtler cousin sometimes called skimpflation, where the price and size stay the same but the quality or service level quietly drops instead. Both are common responses to rising costs. Rather than raise the sticker price and risk losing customers, companies adjust what you get for that same price, which is functionally still inflation just disguised. Inflation also looks different depending on where you live in the world. Some countries have experienced hyperinflation, prices rising so fast that money loses meaningful value within weeks or even days, usually the result of a government printing large amounts of currency to cover its own spending. The US and most developed economies have avoided anything close to that scale, largely due to more independent central banks and more disciplined monetary policy. But it's a useful reminder of just how damaging unchecked inflation can become. Governments and central banks fight high inflation mainly through interest rates. Raising interest rates makes borrowing more expensive across the whole economy, mortgages, car loans, credit cards, which slows down spending and cools overall demand. Less demand chasing the same supply eventually takes pressure off rising prices, though this process takes months or even years to fully play out, and it can slow economic growth in the meantime, which is exactly the trade-off central banks are constantly weighing. For a young adult, understanding inflation matters for a very practical reason. If your income doesn't grow at least as fast as inflation, your real purchasing power is shrinking every single year, even if the number on your paycheck stays the same or even grows a little. That's a major reason long-term saving and investing strategies are built around trying to outpace inflation over time, rather than simply letting cash sit still in an account earning little to nothing. Prices rising isn't random, and it isn't unfair by design. It's the predictable result of supply, demand, production costs, and the total amount of money moving through an economy. Understanding inflation won't stop prices from climbing, but it will help you make far smarter decisions about your income, your savings, and your everyday spending as those prices continue to shift. That's how it actually works. Understanding money doesn't have to be complicated, it just has to be explained clearly. If this helped, subscribe to Dollar Logic for more videos that make sense of the systems around your money. See you in the next one.